It was like my legs were on fire. It was the most incredible pain that I've ever felt.
I was asking myself, was he going to be able to walk again?
Next, then, just hours after incapacitating pain stopped marathon runner Greg Sapp dead in his tracks, a horrifying disease threatens to take over his entire body.
If it spread, I would lose the ability to breathe on my own.
I just didn't know how to handle it anymore. I was at the point that I thought I could lose my son.
Greg Sapp was struck overnight by a mysterious disease that threatened to paralyze and possibly even kill him. In the winter of 2008, 34-year-old Greg Sapp was starting his life over in his hometown of Waycross, Georgia, after a long stint in the armed forces.
I served in the Army for 8 years. I achieved the rank of sergeant, and I've served in the Middle East for 8 months.
I was very proud of him. He'd done a good job for our country.
When Greg came home, he started looking into buy a house. He stayed busy at his job.
I worked in manufacturing. I operated heavy machinery. The job was pretty demanding, but I liked my career.
And when he wasn't at work, Greg was a serious runner.
I started running when I was in the military, and I gained a love for it. I had run one marathon, and I was training for another. I'd run 5 days a week, between 3 and 7 miles each day. I thought I was in the best shape of my life.
But one day in early March, while he's at work, Greg notices something very odd.
I started to get this weird sensation in my right foot, like it was going numb. I thought my foot was asleep, so I took my shoe off and I massaged my foot to see if I could get it to stop, but it didn't go away. The numbness started to gradually move up my leg, and by midday it was up to my knee. I had no clue what was happening.
Despite the weird lack of feeling in his leg, Greg continues working. But by the end of the day, the sensation is even more intense.
The numbing sensation went all the way up my right leg to my thigh, and it was almost impossible for me to work. I'd have to hold on to pieces of the machinery just to be able to get around. I was having to take more breaks, and I was having to go and massage my leg. Nothing I tried helped the situation. When I went home that night, I went and laid down and tried to get some rest. I had all intentions of returning to work the next day. While I was in the Army, I was taught to pretty much suck it up and drive on.
All Greg can imagine is that he's pinched a nerve and hopes things will improve on their own. But in the morning, Greg is horrified by the state he's in.
The numbness moved all the way up to my waist, and it went down to the left thigh. When I stepped down, pain shot up my leg and went straight up to my hip. It was like a stabbing, burning feeling. It was the most incredible pain that I've ever felt. I wasn't able to feel the outside of my leg, but yet I had an intense pain. I wasn't able to stand up. I had lost all control of my legs. I knew there was no time to waste, and I knew that I needed to go to the ER. I had to crawl to the car. I used the vehicle itself to prop myself up on, and I got in my car and drove myself to the emergency room.
The hospital is only 15 minutes away, but Greg isn't sure if he can make it there.
I had no feeling in my legs, and I didn't know if I was applying too much pressure or too little pressure to the brake, and I almost rear-ended someone. I was asking myself what in the world was going on. I didn't know if I was going to make it to the ER.
24 hours ago, Greg Sapp started to feel a strange numbness in his right leg. And then, without warning, it quickly spread across his waist and into his left leg. Now, an excruciatingly painful burning sensation has set in. Panicked, Greg is determined to drive to the emergency room, a task that proves to be almost impossible.
When I got to the hospital, they put me on a gurney and they took me straight to the ICU. People were everywhere. They were taking blood samples. They hooked me up to intravenous pain medications and called my parents.
When I first saw Greg, it was very emotional. He was in a lot of pain. I reached over and put some cover on his legs, and he screamed. Just the sheet touching him hurt him so bad.
The pain was more intense now. It was like my legs were on fire, but it was a continual pain. It terrified me.
The ER doctors immediately suspect he has a neurological problem.
Because I became immobilized in such a short period of time, and because of the numbing sensation, the neurologist thought I had Guillain-Barré.
Guillain-Barré syndrome is a rare autoimmune disorder affecting the nerves outside the brain and spinal cord. If left untreated, Guillain-Barré can result in full body paralysis and even death.
The thought that I could be possibly paralyzed was terrifying. In order to be able to make the determination if it was Guillain-Barré, the doctor had to perform a lumbar puncture to check the fluid within my spinal cord.
But even as the lab technicians are testing his spinal fluid, Greg's condition seems to be deteriorating by the minute.
It kept spreading. At this point, the pain and the numbness was from my waist down to my feet. The pain medications they had me on weren't doing anything.
Each hour, it seemed like his legs progressed worse. I was asking myself, was he going to be able to walk again? Was this something that was life-threatening?
3 hours later, the doctor returns with the results of the spinal fluid and blood tests, which show absolutely nothing out of the ordinary.
I was terrified to know that the doctors had no clue what was going on. They were back to square one.
Then, just 6 hours after being admitted to the ICU, Greg is struck by a frightening new symptom.
Greg was laying there and he kept moving his legs. And I said, Greg, what are you doing? And he said, I can't keep my legs still.
My legs started to shake on their own, and I couldn't control it.
It looked like Greg was being electrocuted. It had gotten to the point that Ernest and I did not know what to expect the next hour.
At this point, the doctors wanted to do an MRI on my spinal cord and my brain so they could rule out multiple sclerosis, because the pain and the shaking is a symptom of multiple sclerosis.
Greg is immediately taken for an emergency MRI. Over the next 2 hours, doctors meticulously examine the images for any abnormalities. But they are left totally empty-handed.
Asked doctors what the next step was. Nobody tell me what was going on.
I was beginning to feel hopeless. I didn't know whether I would wake up the next day.
I felt useless because I could not help him. I could not take his pain away. And I couldn't get him out of the bed. I just had to sit there and watch Greg suffer.
And the next morning, to the family's horror, the mysterious disease begins affecting yet another part of Greg's body.
The pain and numbness spread to my right hand. Then I thought it was going to take over my whole body.
I just didn't know how to handle it anymore. I was at the point that I thought I could lose my son.
When I told the doctor that the pain had spread to my hand, they still had no clue what was going on. The doctor said that if it spread and continue moving,